The afternoon sun burned hot over the Montana ranch as Jake Crawford worked on the fence line. He was 53 years old and had spent every day of his life on this land. The river nearby made a peaceful sound as it flowed past his property. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead and reached for another fence post. His wife had died 5 years ago, and since then the ranch had been quiet. Too quiet sometimes. He lived alone now, and the days blended together in a rhythm of work and sleep. A splash broke through the peaceful afternoon. Then came the screaming. Jake dropped his tools and ran toward the river. His boots pounded the dry earth as he pushed through the brush. 2 boys were in the water and they were drowning. The current pulled them downstream fast. Their small arms reached up desperately as the water swallowed them again and again. Jake did not think. He just acted. He jumped into the cold water and the shock hit his body hard. But he had swum in this river his whole life and knew every rock and current. He reached the first boy and grabbed his shirt. The child coughed up water and his eyes showed pure terror. Jake pulled him close and kicked hard toward the bank. The second boy was farther down now and going under. Jake pushed the first boy onto a flat rock near the shore. The child held on tight and Jake dove back into the rushing water. His arms burned and his lungs ached, but he swam harder. The second boy went under again. Jake reached down into the dark water and felt something. He grabbed it and pulled. The boy came up coughing and crying. Jake wrapped one arm around him and fought the current back to shore. Both boys lay on the riverbank spitting up water. Jake knelt beside them, breathing hard. His clothes stuck to his body and water ran from his hair. He looked at the boys closely and his eyes went wide. These were not normal children. Their skin was pale blue and seemed to glow slightly in the sunlight. Their eyes were too large and colored like gold. When they spoke to each other, the sounds were strange. Clicks and musical notes that Jake had never heard before. The boys were scared. They looked around at the trees and the sky like they had never seen such things before. Jake stood up slowly and held out his hands to show he meant no harm. He pointed to his truck parked up on the road. The boys looked at each other and then at him. They seemed to understand. Jake led them to the vehicle and found some old blankets behind the seat. He wrapped both boys up and started the engine. The drive back to his ranch house took 10 minutes. The boys sat quietly in the truck, still shaking from cold and fear. Jake glanced at them in the mirror. What were they? Where did they come from? His mind raced with questions, but right now they just needed to be warm and safe. Everything else could wait. At the house, Jake built a fire in the fireplace. The boys sat close to it, holding the blankets tight around their shoulders. Jake made sandwiches and hot cocoa. He did not know if they could eat human food, but they took it eagerly. They ate fast like they had not had a meal in days. While they ate, Jake tried to talk to them, but they did not understand English. They pointed at themselves and said names that sounded like Kale and Wren. Jake pointed at himself and said his name slowly. The boys repeated it in their strange accent. Kale smiled a little, and that made Jake feel better. At least they were not hurt. He checked them over for injuries, but found only some scrapes and bruises. Whatever these children were, they seemed mostly human in shape, even if their coloring was all wrong. The sun went down, and darkness came to the ranch. Jake set up the guest room for the boys. Clean sheets and soft pillows. They looked at the bed like it was something wonderful. Maybe they had been sleeping rough for days. Jake showed them the bathroom and how the lights worked. They seemed fascinated by everything. Simple things like running water and electric lights amazed them. Jake left them to rest and went to his own room. He sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands. This was crazy. He had just pulled 2 alien children from his river. They were in his house right now, sleeping in his guest room. He should call someone. The sheriff maybe, or the government. But something stopped him. These boys were scared and alone. What would happen to them if he called the authorities? Would they be treated well, or would they become test subjects in some lab? No, for tonight they were safe here. Tomorrow he would figure out what to do. Jake lay back on his bed, but sleep did not come easy. His mind kept showing him those golden eyes full of fear and gratitude. He had done the right thing pulling them from the river. Any decent person would have done the same. But now what? What came next? Outside his window, the stars shone bright in the clear Montana sky. Jake stared up at them and wondered which one these boys had come from. Space had always seemed so far away and impossible, but now it had crashed into his life in the form of 2 drowning children. His quiet existence was over. Deep down he knew that. Whatever happened next, his life would never be the same. The house settled into silence. The boys slept peacefully for the first time in who knew how long. Jake finally closed his eyes, but his rest was troubled. He dreamed of rivers and stars and golden eyes watching him from the darkness. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. The rescue was just the beginning. Soon someone would come looking for these boys, and Jake Crawford would have to make choices he never imagined making. But for now, they were all safe. For now, the night was quiet. And for now, that was enough. Jake woke suddenly in the middle of the night. Something was wrong. The normal sounds of the ranch were gone. No crickets sang. No cattle made noise in the distance. Even the wind had stopped. The silence was heavy and unnatural. He sat up fast with his heart beating hard in his chest. A strange blue light came through his bedroom window, pulsing like a heartbeat. He grabbed his hunting rifle from the closet and moved quietly down the hall. First he checked on Kale and Wren. They were both asleep and seemed peaceful. Whatever was happening outside had not disturbed them yet. Jake went downstairs and looked out the front window. What he saw made his blood run cold. A woman stood in his front yard, but she was not human. She was almost 7 feet tall with pale blue skin covered in silver patterns that glowed softly. Her hair moved around her head like it was alive, flowing in a wind that did not exist. Her eyes burned with golden light much brighter than the boys'. She wore armor that looked both ancient and futuristic at the same time. The metal seemed to flow across her body like water. Behind her stood 100 warriors. They were arranged in perfect rows like soldiers on parade. Each one was tall and armed with weapons that crackled with energy. Their armor gleamed in the starlight. They stood absolutely still, waiting for orders. This was an army, and they had come to his ranch. Jake's hands shook as he held his rifle. He knew the weapon would be useless against such beings, but holding it made him feel slightly better. This was no ordinary situation. This was beyond anything he had ever experienced or imagined. These were not people coming to rob him. This was something from another world entirely. The woman stepped forward, moving with grace that seemed impossible for something so large. She raised one hand palm out in what looked like a gesture of peace. When she spoke, her voice carried across the distance clearly. It sounded like music and power combined. She called him by name. Jake Crawford, she said. She knew who he was. She spoke English. His mind struggled to process this. She introduced herself as Commander. Lyra of the Ascendant Fleet. She had come seeking. Her sons Kale and Wren. Their escape pod had crashed in his river, and she had tracked them. Here Jake found his voice, though it came out rough. He told her the boys were safe. He had pulled them from the water. They were sleeping upstairs. He watched Lyra's face carefully. Her expression changed, showing relief and something like gratitude. She said he had saved them. She said her sons had told her humans were interesting, but she had not believed them. He had risked his life for children who were not even his species. Jake said any decent person would have done the same. He meant it. He could not imagine leaving those boys to drown. But Lyra shook her head slowly. She said in all their travels across 1,000 worlds, kindness to strangers was rare. True courage was even rarer. He had both. Jake lowered his rifle and set it against the wall. He opened his front door and stepped onto his porch. He felt very small standing before this alien commander and her army. He told her she could take the boys. They belonged with their mother. He would not stop her. Lyra studied him for a long moment. Her golden eyes seemed to look right through him to his soul. She explained that her sons had crashed while her fleet was doing reconnaissance in this sector. The Ascendant were explorers and protectors who traveled the galaxy. They had fought terrible wars against enemies with names Jake could not pronounce. They had seen civilizations rise and fall across thousands of years. She gestured to the warriors behind her. These were her finest soldiers, veterans of 100 battles. When she learned her sons were in danger, every single one had volunteered to come with her. They would have torn this world apart to find them. Jake felt a chill at how casually she spoke of such destruction. But then Lyra said something that surprised him. She said he had simply acted with kindness. He fed the boys and kept them warm. He asked for nothing in return. This spoke of his character and perhaps of humanity's potential. Jake told her honestly that humans were not all good. They had done terrible things to each other and to their world. But most tried to do right when they could. Lyra nodded slowly at his words. She said imperfection did not erase goodness. She appreciated his honesty. She made a gesture and 2 warriors moved forward. Jake stepped back, letting them enter his house. Moments later, they came out with Kale and Ren. The boys were awake now and excited. They ran to their mother, calling out in their alien language. Lyra knelt down and embraced both boys. Her fierce warrior face melted into pure love. She checked them for injuries and smoothed their hair. The boys talked fast, pointing at Jake and gesturing wildly. They were telling her something about him. Jake could see it in their movements. When Lyra looked back at Jake, everything had changed in her expression. She said her sons told her he was gentle with them, even though he was clearly frightened. Kale mentioned the sweet warm drink. Ren talked about the soft blankets and safe place to sleep. Small things, but they meant everything to scared children far from home. Jake shrugged and said it was the least he could do, but Lyra disagreed strongly. She said it was everything. For his kindness, he had earned the gratitude of the Ascendant. They did not forget debts of honor. Her tone made it clear this was serious. This was not just polite words. She meant what she said. Jake expected them to leave then. Mission accomplished. But Lyra surprised him again. She gave orders in her language, and the warriors began setting up equipment around his ranch. They moved with quick efficiency, creating some kind of perimeter. Jake asked what was happening. His confusion and worry were obvious. Lyra's expression turned grave. She explained that when the escape pod crashed, it sent out a distress signal. That signal was detected by her fleet, but also by their enemies. The Zathari collective hunted the Ascendant across the stars. They would come here to this exact location seeking the pod and hoping to capture her sons. They would not care about Earth or its people. They would take what they wanted and leave destruction behind. Jake felt his stomach drop. He asked when they would come. Lyra said soon. Maybe hours, maybe less. But then she placed a hand on his shoulder. Despite her alien appearance, the gesture felt reassuring. She said he would not face them alone. Her warriors would defend this place and him within it. They owed him that much, and the Ascendant always paid their debts. Jake stood on his porch watching the Ascendant warriors prepare for battle. They moved like water flowing around obstacles, working together without needing to speak. Energy barriers appeared around the ranch, shimmering faintly in the darkness. Weapons platforms rose from metal cases and positioned themselves at key points. Sensors spread out in all directions, creating an invisible net that would detect anything approaching. This was his land. His home. The place where he had been born and raised. Where he had married his wife and buried her 5 years later. Every fence post and water trough held memories. And now it was about to become a battlefield because he had pulled 2 boys from a river. Jake should have felt angry or afraid, but mostly he felt determined. This was his home and he would defend it. Lyra approached him carrying a small device. She explained it carefully. If she gave the order, he should press the button. It would create a protective barrier around him. The shield would not last long, but it might save his life. Jake took it and put it in his pocket. He told her this was his land. If there was going to be a fight here, he wanted to help. Lyra studied him quietly. Most beings would run, she said. Most would flee to safety and let warriors handle the danger. But he wanted to stand and fight. She approved of this. She led him to a holographic display that showed images in the air. Jake saw ships of brutal design, all sharp angles and dark metal. He saw creatures that looked like nightmares standing upright with multiple arms and cold eyes. These were the Zathari, conquerors who viewed other species as resources or obstacles. They had destroyed hundreds of worlds in their expansion. The Ascendant stood against them, defending those who could not defend themselves. Jake asked if they were really coming here because of her sons. Lyra explained that her sons were valuable targets because they were important to her. But more than that, the Zathari would want to study Earth. If they found humans interesting, they might return with a full invasion force. The weight of that settled on Jake heavily. His simple act of kindness had drawn the attention of cosmic forces. He asked what he could do to help. Lyra smiled with approval in her golden eyes. He could trust them and follow instructions when battle began. Beyond that, his courage was already noted. Many would flee in terror. He stood his ground. That meant something to the Ascendant. Hours passed in tense preparation. Kale and Ren stayed close to their mother but kept looking at Jake with admiration. Finally, Ren approached, speaking in careful English. He thanked Jake for saving them. His mother said Jake was brave. Jake replied that he just did what anyone should do. But Kale disagreed. Many would not, he said. They learned about humans in their studies, some good, some bad, like all species. But Jake was good. Jake found himself touched by their simple honesty. He told them their mother raised them right. They were good boys. Lyra joined them, having heard the conversation. She explained that her sons studied various species as part of their education. They were fascinated by humans and their capacity for both cruelty and compassion. When they asked permission to observe Earth more closely, she granted it. The crash was an accident, but perhaps also fate. Jake asked if she believed in fate. Lyra said she believed in patterns and meaningful encounters. He saved her sons for a reason. Tonight they would discover what that reason was. As darkness fell completely, the warriors took their final positions. Lyra stood at the center of the defensive formation. Her armor glowed with energy. She handed Jake the protective device again, reminding him how to use it. One of the warriors called out urgently. They were coming. Lyra's eyes blazed brighter. She commanded her warriors to take positions. They must protect the human and her sons at all costs. Today they would show the Zathari that the Ascendant never abandoned their debts. Today they defended this place as if it were their own homeworld. The warriors raised their weapons and the air began to shimmer with power. Lights appeared in the sky, descending rapidly. 3 ships came down like predators, screaming through the atmosphere. Their dark hulls were etched with glowing red lines. They circled once, scanning the ranch with crimson beams. Jake felt the air pressure change. He tasted something metallic and wrong. Then, with a sound like tearing metal, the ships released their cargo. Zathari warriors dropped from the vessels. Dozens of them landed hard enough to crater the ground. They were as tall as the Ascendant but built differently. Segmented exoskeletons in black and deep red. Angular heads with multiple glowing eyes. Arms ending in 3-fingered claws. They carried weapons that hummed with energy. They looked like death-given form. The lead Zathari roared in a harsh voice. He demanded Lyra surrender the Ascendant spawn and the primitive who sheltered them. Lyra stepped forward fearless despite being outnumbered. She told them the Zathari collective had no authority here. They must leave immediately or face consequences. The Zathari leader laughed. The sound was like grinding metal. He mocked her position. 100 against their forces, far from her fleet with primitives and younglings to protect. Her strategic position was worthless, he said. Lyra stood tall. Her position was one of honor, she replied. Something the Zathari abandoned long ago. This human saved her sons at risk to his own life, expecting nothing in return. He was under Ascendant protection now. Attack him, and they attacked all of them. The Zathari leader said so be it. Then he gave the order to attack. The world exploded into violence. Energy bolts screamed through the air, brilliant and deadly. Ascendant warriors returned fire, creating shields of light that stopped the attacks. The sound was deafening, a constant roar of energy weapons and shouted commands. Jake dove behind the defensive barrier near his porch. Kale and Ren were rushed into the house by 2 soldiers, who sealed the entrance with an energy field. The battle raged across his property with terrible intensity. Ascendant warriors moved with fluid grace, fighting with precision and coordination. The Zathari fought with brutal efficiency, advancing in formations and concentrating fire. Jake watched in horror as one Ascendant warrior's shield failed. The warrior fell and 2 comrades dragged him back while others provided covering fire. Lyra was magnificent in battle. She moved through chaos like a force of nature. Her weapons cut through Zathari armor with focused beams. When 3 enemies tried to flank her, she spun and unleashed a wave of force that threw them backward. But the Zathari kept coming. For every one that fell, another took its place. Their ships continued deploying reinforcements. Jake realized with growing dread that the Ascendant were being slowly overwhelmed by numbers. A Zathari warrior broke through the defensive line, heading straight for Jake, its multiple eyes fixed on him with predatory hunger. It raised its weapon, and Jake knew he was about to die. He reached for the protective device in his pocket, but knew he would be too slow. This was the end. Then a shotgun blast rang out across the battlefield. The Zathari staggered, its attention diverted from Jake. He turned in shock to see his neighbor Frank Murphy standing at the edge of the property with his hunting shotgun. Behind Frank were more people from town. Old Sheriff Pete Donovan with his service pistol. Jenny Wright from the feed store carrying her father's rifle. Bobby Chen from the gas station holding a baseball bat like a club. Frank chambered another round and shouted that nobody messed with their people. The townspeople opened fire with their primitive weapons. Bullets and buckshot could not penetrate Zathari armor, but they created a crucial distraction. The Ascendant warriors used the opportunity to regroup and reinforce their positions. They pushed back against the Zathari advance with renewed strength. Lyra called out to Jake over the noise of battle. She said his people were brave but foolish. They would be slaughtered with their primitive weapons. Jake shouted back that they were defending their home. Same as her. The battle grew more intense as more townspeople arrived. They had seen the lights and heard the sounds from miles away. They came to help because that was what neighbors did. The humans could not hurt the Zathari with their weapons, but they created confusion. They drew fire. They gave the Ascendant warriors those crucial extra seconds to maneuver and strike. Old Pete Wilson made the biggest difference. He drove his diesel truck straight into a cluster of Zathari warriors, scattering them like bowling pins. The Ascendant took advantage instantly. Their weapons cut down the confused enemies before they could regroup. Lyra saw what was happening and made a tactical decision. She called out orders in her language. The Ascendant formation shifted from defending the entire ranch to a tighter perimeter. They created a zone of overlapping fire that nothing could penetrate. The Zathari leader recognized the tactical shift. He called for withdrawal. His forces began retreating toward their ships, still firing as they went. But Lyra was not finished. She raised both arms and energy gathered around her in a brilliant corona of light. She shouted for the Ascendant for honor for those who showed kindness to strangers. Then she released the energy in a focused beam that struck the lead Zathari ship. The vessel's shields flared bright. They held for a moment, then collapsed with a sound like breaking glass. The ship began to list sideways. Emergency systems failed. Smoke poured from damaged sections. The other two Zathari ships grabbed their wounded companion with tractor beams. They pulled up hard, fleeing into the atmosphere. They abandoned their warriors on the ground. Those left behind found themselves surrounded. They fought with desperate fury, but without air support or reinforcements, they were quickly overwhelmed. The Ascendant warriors were efficient and ruthless. Within minutes, the battle was over. The remaining Zathari warriors lay defeated. Energy fields contained them, preventing escape. The Ascendant had won, but Jake could see they had paid a price. Several warriors were wounded. Their equipment showed damage from intense combat. Scorch marks covered the ground. Parts of Jake's ranch were destroyed. But they had survived. As the sun began to rise over the Montana landscape, Jake stood among the ruins of his yard. He was surrounded by alien warriors and his neighbors. Everyone looked stunned by what they had witnessed and done. The night had changed them all forever. Nothing would ever be the same. Lyra approached Jake. Her armor was scorched and dented, but she stood proud. She said his people fought beside them. This was unprecedented in her experience. No primitive species had ever joined an Ascendant battle before. Jake replied simply that this was Montana. They looked after their own, and anyone who stood with them became their own. It was that simple to him. Lyra looked at the assembled townspeople, at Frank and Pete and Jenny and Bobby and all the others who had risked their lives with nothing but courage and primitive weapons. Something shifted in her expression, a recognition of something she had not expected to find on this primitive world. She said slowly that perhaps they had underestimated humanity. Perhaps there was more to this species than anyone had realized. Frank Murphy walked over to Jake, still carrying his shotgun. His hands shook slightly as he spoke. He asked what in the world had just happened. His voice was hoarse from shouting during the battle. Before Jake could answer, the sound of approaching vehicles filled the air. Military helicopters appeared on the horizon. Government vehicles sped down the rural highway toward the ranch. The Ascendant warriors immediately raised their weapons, forming a protective circle. Lyra stepped forward, placing herself between the approaching human forces and Jake. Jake called out to both sides. He shouted for everyone to stand down. Nobody else needed to die today. His voice carried authority that surprised even himself. The helicopters landed at a safe distance. Armed soldiers emerged, taking positions but not advancing. A black vehicle pulled up and several people in suits got out. They were led by a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and an air of command. She introduced herself as Director Helen Price of the Advanced Threat Response Division. She announced that this area was now under federal jurisdiction. All civilians needed to evacuate immediately. Jake stepped forward and said this was his land. These people were his neighbors, and these aliens were his guests. He spoke calmly but firmly. Director Price looked at him with surprise. She said they understood he had been through a traumatic experience. They were here to help, but they needed to secure the situation before there was further risk to civilian lives. Lyra spoke up. Her voice carried clearly across the distance. She identified herself as Commander Lyra of the Ascendant Fleet. The hostile forces had been repelled, she said. There was no further threat to this world at this time. She spoke with absolute confidence and authority. The government people stared at her, clearly struggling to process the reality of first contact happening in a Montana ranch yard. Director Price maintained her composure better than most. She welcomed Lyra to Earth on behalf of the United States government. She said they had much to discuss but needed to ensure citizen safety first. Lyra replied that these citizens ensured their own safety. They fought beside her warriors against the Zathari Collective. They showed courage that would honor any Ascendant soldier. Humanity had potential her people did not anticipate. Director Price looked at the scorched ground and damaged equipment. She looked at the captured Zathari warriors contained in their energy fields. Jake could see her mind working rapidly, assessing the situation. She suggested they needed a longer conversation about what happened and what it meant for Earth. She asked if Jake would be willing to host this discussion on his property until they could establish a more formal meeting place. Jake looked at Lyra, who nodded slightly. He said his kitchen table had seen stranger things, though he would need to make a lot more coffee. Over the next several hours, Jake's ranch became the site of humanity's first official diplomatic contact with an alien species. Director Price brought in more personnel, including scientists and military advisors. Lyra allowed a small group of humans to approach, though her warriors maintained their protective perimeter. Nobody was taking chances after the battle. Inside Jake's house, around his worn kitchen table, the conversation that would shape humanity's future began. Kale and Ren sat with their mother, occasionally adding observations about humans and their world. Director Price and her team listened with intense focus as Lyra explained the broader galactic situation. Jake made coffee and listened, feeling out of his depth, but understanding this was important. Lyra activated a holographic display that showed a star map floating above the table. She explained that Earth existed in a region of space called the Frontier Reaches. It was far from the core territories of most major civilizations which had protected humanity thus far. But the Zathari Collective expanded constantly, consuming resources and enslaving species. Eventually, they would reach Earth. It was not a question of if, but when. Director Price asked how long they had. Lyra said it was unknown. Years, perhaps decades, but today's attack would be reported. The Collective now knew that Earth sheltered those who opposed them. They would remember this place. They would come back eventually, and next time it would not be 3 ships. It would be a full invasion force. Jake spoke up quietly, saying then they needed to prepare. They needed to be ready to defend themselves. Lyra looked at him with respect in her golden eyes. She agreed. But preparation required knowledge and technology and alliances. These things took time to build. They could not happen overnight, no matter how much anyone wished it. Director Price leaned forward and said they were willing to learn. She asked what the Ascendant could offer humanity. Lyra explained carefully that the Ascendant were explorers and protectors, not conquerors. They could offer knowledge and friendship and training, but they could not defend Earth forever. Humanity must become strong enough to stand on its own. That was the only way to survive in the galaxy. One of the military advisors asked suspiciously what the Ascendant wanted in return. Nothing came free in his experience. Lyra replied that in return Earth would become an ally in the struggle against tyranny across the stars. When humanity was ready, they could join the Ascendant cause, helping protect other worlds that faced the same threats. It was not slavery or conquest. It was partnership between equals. Director Price sat back. The weight of the decision was evident on her face. She said this was beyond her authority to agree to. She would need to brief the president and consult with their allies. This changed everything humanity thought they knew about the universe. Lyra said she understood, but she pointed out that Jake Crawford made his choice instantly without consultation or consideration of personal cost. He saw beings in need and acted to help them. That kind of courage and compassion was what the galaxy needed. Frank Murphy had been standing awkwardly in the corner with several other townspeople. He spoke up, saying they did not think about governments or politics when they came to help. They just knew Jake was in trouble, and Jake was a good man. That was enough for them. That was how things worked in small communities. Lyra smiled at him. She said precisely. This was the human potential she spoke of. The ability to recognize what was right and act upon it regardless of difference or danger. If humanity could embrace those qualities on a larger scale, they would not merely survive. They would thrive and become a force for good in the galaxy. The meeting continued for hours. Technical teams examined Zathari equipment and the captured warriors. Scientists collected data on everything they could. Linguists worked with the Ascendant to build translation protocols. Throughout it all, Jake found himself at the center of something far larger than his simple ranch life. He had never wanted attention or fame. He just wanted to live quietly on his land. But fate had other plans. As evening fell, Lyra found Jake standing on his porch looking out over his damaged property. The defense barriers were coming down. Alien technology was being carefully documented by human scientists under Ascendant supervision. His ranch looked like a war zone, which in a way it had been. Jake felt tired deep in his bones. Lyra stood beside him and said softly that his world would never be the same. Because of today, humanity took its first steps into the greater galaxy. Everything would change now. There was no going back to the way things were before. Jake replied that it was all because he pulled two boys from a river. His voice held wonder and disbelief at how much had changed from such a simple act. Lyra told him never to underestimate the power of simple goodness. Empires had risen and fallen on less. One person making one right choice could change the course of history. He had proven that. Jake turned to her and asked what happened now. What came next for Earth and for humanity? Lyra explained that she must return to her fleet with her sons. But she would leave behind a small team to serve as liaisons to his government. They would begin the process of preparing humanity for what was to come, and she would speak to the Ascendant Council about Earth and what she witnessed here, about courage and compassion shown by a primitive species who had never left their own planet. Jake asked if they would see each other again. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder in the gesture that had become familiar. She gave her word as an Ascendant commander. He saved her sons and stood beside them in battle. That made him family by their traditions. And family did not abandon family. She would return. That night, as the Ascendant ships prepared to depart, the townspeople gathered to watch. They stood in groups talking quietly about what they had witnessed. Kale and Ren came to say goodbye to Jake. Each gave him a tight hug that made the old rancher's eyes water. Kale said in his improving English that Jake was brave and kind. The best of humanity. Ren agreed, nodding seriously. Jake told them to take care of their mother. He said maybe they could visit again sometime when they were not crashing into rivers. The boys laughed at his gentle joke. Even Lyra smiled. It felt good to laugh after everything they had been through. The tension broke, and for a moment they were just people saying goodbye to friends. The Ascendant ships lifted off into the night sky. Their hulls gleamed in the moonlight as they rose higher and higher. Jake stood surrounded by his neighbors and new government acquaintances, watching humanity's first alien allies depart into the stars. He knew his quiet life was over. He would never get it back. But he also knew something else. Something important. Whatever came next, humanity would face it together. The townspeople had proven that by coming to fight beside alien warriors against an enemy, they did not understand. They had not run or hidden. They had stood their ground and fought for what was right. If humans could do that, then maybe they had a chance. Maybe they could survive in this dangerous galaxy after all. Jake felt hope stirring in his chest. It was small and fragile, but it was real. The stars above held dangers beyond imagination. But they also held possibilities and wonders, and humanity was ready to reach for them. They would stumble and make mistakes, but they would keep trying. That was what humans did. They endured and they adapted and they never gave up. Jake Crawford had shown them the way. Now it was up to everyone else to follow. The events at the Crawford Ranch could not be contained. Within 2 days, despite the government's attempts to control the narrative, the truth spread across the globe. Too many people had witnessed the battle. Too many cell phone videos existed. Too many scientists and military personnel were involved. The secret was too big to keep. The world reacted with wonder and fear in equal measure. Some people celebrated, believing this was proof humans were not alone in the universe. Others panicked, convinced alien invasion was imminent. Religious leaders offered various interpretations. Politicians argued about what it meant for national security. Scientists published papers rapidly rewriting everything they thought they knew. Jake found himself at the center of a media storm he never wanted. News vans surrounded his property, kept at bay by military personnel. Reporters shouted questions whenever he appeared outside. His face was on every television screen and website and newspaper. He was called a hero and a fraud and a government agent and a harbinger of doom. Everyone had an opinion about him. Director Price and her team established a permanent facility on a section of Jake's ranch with his reluctant permission. The site where the Ascendant made their stand became the Frontier Diplomatic Center, a place where the small team of alien liaisons Lyra left behind worked with human scientists and diplomats. Construction happened fast. Within weeks, buildings rose where cattle used to graze. The Ascendant team was led by Commander Darius, a veteran warrior who fought in the battle. He was patient with humanity's endless questions. He understood their fears about the unknown, but he was firm in his commitment to help prepare Earth for the challenges ahead. He gave press conferences trying to calm public anxiety while being honest about the dangers. Darius explained that Earth was young by galactic standards. Humanity had achieved much in their short history, but they were also fractured, divided by borders and ideologies that seemed important now, but would mean little when external threats arrived. He spoke carefully, trying not to offend while being truthful. Unity was essential for survival. Division would lead to destruction. The international response was complicated. The United Nations called emergency sessions that lasted weeks. World leaders demanded access to alien technology and information. Some nations claimed the Ascendant violated sovereignty by landing on Earth without permission. Others praised the aliens for helping defend humanity against the Zathari. Everyone wanted something different. Religious leaders struggled to incorporate aliens into their beliefs. Some saw them as proof of infinite creation. Others called them demons or tests of faith. Most simply admitted they did not know what it meant. Scientists were more united in their excitement. They published papers and shared data freely. For them, this was the greatest discovery in human history. But it was ordinary people who interested Jake most. He read letters from children who drew pictures of him and the Ascendant warriors. He received emails from parents thanking him for giving humanity hope. He heard from veterans who understood the decision to stand and fight. He saw videos of people worldwide holding vigils not in fear, but in anticipation of a greater future. Frank Murphy visited one evening, bringing beer and settling onto the porch beside Jake. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching activity at the new diplomatic center. Lights glowed from windows. People moved between buildings. It looked busy and important. Finally, Frank spoke, saying life was simpler a week ago. Jake agreed quietly, but Frank continued, saying he would not change what happened, what they did. His kids were going to grow up knowing there was more out there. That was a gift in a way, a chance to be part of something bigger than just Earth. Jake replied that it was also a burden, knowing there were threats they barely understood lurking in the darkness between stars. Frank took a long drink and said they always had threats. Humans had been threatening each other for thousands of years. Wars and violence and hatred. At least now they had a reason to work together. A common enemy and a common goal. Maybe that would make the difference. Maybe it would force people to see past their differences. Jake hoped his friend was right. The news was not all positive. Some nations used the revelation as justification for increased military spending and aggressive posturing. Conspiracy theories spread like wildfire across the internet. There were protests both for and against welcoming alien contact. People held signs calling for isolation and others demanding cooperation. But there were signs of hope too. Scientists from competing nations worked together at the Frontier Diplomatic Center, sharing data freely. Young people organized movements calling for global cooperation. Technology companies pledged resources to help humanity prepare for its new place in the galaxy. It was not perfect, but it was progress. 3 weeks after the battle, Jake received an unexpected video message. His computer screen lit up with the faces of Kyle and Ren. They looked happy and healthy back with their fleet. Both boys smiled wide and talked excitedly over each other. Kyle said hello and that they missed him. They were telling everyone about the brave human who saved them, about Earth and its interesting people. Ren explained that their mother had spoken to the Ascendant Council about Earth. The council was impressed by reports of the battle, especially the part about townspeople fighting with primitive weapons to help defend them. Lyra said it showed humans had warrior spirit and courage. The council agreed to formalize an alliance with Earth. It was unprecedented for such a young species. Kel said they missed Jake and missed Earth. Their mother promised they could visit again, soon when things were more settled. when humanity was more prepared. Wren added that they were studying harder now, learning everything about diplomacy and leadership. Someday they wanted to help bridge the gap between their peoples. The message ended with Lyra appearing briefly. She looked tired but determined. She spoke directly to Jake, saying the Ascendant did not forget their debts. What he began would echo across the stars. Humanity had been given a gift. Time to prepare and knowledge to grow and allies to call upon. They must use these gifts wisely. She would speak with him again soon. Director Price visited Jake that evening. She looked exhausted. The weight of her responsibilities showed in the lines around her eyes. She sat down across from him and said the president wanted to establish him as an official liaison between humanity and the Ascendant. Lyra specifically requested his involvement in any formal diplomatic processes. His presence was required. Jake laughed without humor. He said he was just a rancher. He did not know anything about diplomacy or politics or international relations. He was the wrong person for such an important job. But Helen shook her head firmly. She said he knew about decency, about doing the right thing regardless of personal cost. That was what Lyra valued and honestly what humanity needed right now. She told him he did not have to decide immediately, but he should think about it seriously. He started this by pulling 2 boys from a river. He changed the course of human history with one simple act of kindness. Maybe he was the right person to help guide humanity through what came next. Maybe his simple honesty was exactly what complicated politics needed. Jake asked what came next. What was the plan for humanity's future? Helen explained they were trying to figure that out. The Ascendant offered to help develop new technologies and establish defensive capabilities and learn about the galaxy. But there were risks. Some people feared becoming dependent on aliens, losing independence and identity in the process. Jake asked if they were becoming dependent. Helen said honestly that she did not know, but she knew they had enemies now. The Zathari knew about Earth. According to Darius, they were not the only threat out there. Humanity could face those threats alone and probably fail, or accept help and hopefully survive. Neither choice was perfect or easy. Jake looked out at the stars thinking about Lyra and her sons. About Darius and the other Ascendant working to help humanity. About the Zathari and other threats lurking in darkness. He thought for a long time before speaking. Finally, he said they should accept the help, learn and grow and prepare, but do it without losing who they were as humans. That was the balance they had to find. Helen asked if he would help them find that balance. Jake sighed, feeling responsibility settling on his shoulders like a heavy weight. He said he would try. He was just one man, but he would do his best. Helen smiled genuinely for the first time in weeks. She said one man who pulled 2 boys from a river, one man who stood his ground when aliens came, one man who inspired neighbors to risk their lives for strangers. Never underestimate the power of one person doing the right thing. History turned on such moments, and Jake had created one of those moments. 6 months after first contact, Earth was transformed. The Frontier Diplomatic Center had expanded into a small city with facilities for research and training and diplomatic functions. Representatives from every nation worked alongside Ascendant advisors, learning about galactic politics and advanced technologies and the threats lurking among the stars. Progress happened faster than anyone expected. Jake had reluctantly accepted his role as special liaison for Ascendant relations. The title still made him uncomfortable. He was a rancher, not a diplomat, but he learned that sometimes the best person for a job was not the one who wanted it, but the one who understood its importance. People trusted him because he had no agenda, except doing what was right. He split his time between the ranch and the diplomatic center. The ranch was being restored with help from advanced Ascendant construction technology. Buildings rose in days that would have taken months before. Fences repaired themselves using smart materials. His cattle grazed peacefully, unaware their home had become the center of human-alien relations. At the center, Jake participated in meetings that often left his head spinning with complexity. Technology sharing began slowly and carefully. The Ascendant refused to simply hand over advanced weapons or unlimited power generation. They recognized that humanity needed to develop its own understanding before wielding such tools. Technology given freely was technology taken for granted, technology that could be misused or weaponized against each other. Instead, they offered guidance, allowing human scientists to discover and develop new technologies based on principles the aliens revealed. Commander Darius explained this during one training session. He said humanity must walk the path themselves, earn their advancement through effort and understanding. That way it would become part of their civilization's foundation, something they truly comprehended rather than just copied. The process was slower, but the results would be stronger and lasting. The results were still remarkable even with the careful approach. Human scientists made breakthroughs in energy production that could change everything. New materials were developed that were stronger and lighter than anything before. Propulsion systems advanced by decades in just months. The first human ship capable of leaving the solar system was under construction. A joint project between 12 nations and Ascendant advisors working together, but not everyone welcomed these changes. Protests erupted in major cities, some violent against alien influence on Earth. Political factions argued about who should control access to new technologies. Several nations tried to exclude others from knowledge sharing, threatening to fracture humanity just when unity was most needed. Old prejudices and rivalries did not disappear just because aliens arrived. Jake found himself mediating disputes that would have been unimaginable a year earlier. He sat in rooms with presidents and prime ministers, with scientists and generals, with religious leaders and activists. Everyone had different priorities and concerns. Getting them to agree on anything was exhausting, but somehow his plain speaking cut through the rhetoric. During one particularly heated meeting, Jake stood up and said firmly that this was not about any one nation or ideology. This was about humanity's survival. The Ascendant were helping because they believed humans had potential. But if humanity tore itself apart fighting over these gifts, they would prove the aliens wrong. They would show they were not ready for the galaxy. His words created silence in the room. His obvious sincerity had an effect that political speeches could not achieve. He was not polished or sophisticated. He did not use fancy words or clever arguments. But people trusted him. He was the man who risked his life for alien children without hesitation, who stood beside alien warriors in battle, who asked nothing for himself while working to help all of humanity. That meant something. 7 months after first contact, Lyra returned to Earth. Her arrival was announced in advance as a formal diplomatic visit to assess humanity's progress. But when her ship landed at the Frontier Diplomatic Center, it was Jake she greeted first. She embraced him warmly in the Ascendant manner. She said he looked tired and asked about his health with genuine concern. Jake admitted that diplomacy was harder than ranching. Cattle were simpler than politicians. Lyra laughed at that. Then she asked about her sons. Jake said Kale and Ren were doing well from what he saw in their messages. They asked about Earth constantly. Lyra smiled with maternal pride, saying they were growing quickly and constantly asking when they could visit again. They told everyone about the brave human who saved them from the river. Over several days, Jake and Director Price gave Lyra a comprehensive tour of everything humanity accomplished. They showed her research facilities where scientists worked on new propulsion theories. They demonstrated defensive systems being installed around Earth, based on Ascendant designs but built with human engineering. They introduced her to the international team coordinating preparation efforts across all nations. Lyra observed everything with keen interest, asking questions and offering praise where appropriate. Jake could see she was assessing not just technological progress, but social and political developments as well. How well were humans working together? Had they overcome their divisions? Were they truly ready for what was coming? Her evaluation would determine Earth's future relationship with the Ascendant. After the tour, they had a private dinner at Jake's ranch. The house was restored now better than before. They sat on his porch watching the sunset over Montana hills. Lyra said humans had done well, better than she hoped, honestly. When she first came here, she feared humanity would splinter under pressure of new knowledge. Instead, they were finding ways to work together even if imperfectly. Jake said it was not perfect. They still fought about things. Some nations cooperated better than others. There was still prejudice and selfishness and short-sighted thinking. But they were trying. That had to count for something. Lyra agreed, saying perfection was impossible. Progress was what mattered. Effort and intention and direction. Humans were moving in the right direction even if the path was not straight. Then Lyra told him something important. The Ascendant Council decided to formally invite Earth to join the Coalition of Free Worlds. Jake asked what that meant exactly. Lyra explained it meant humanity would have a voice in galactic affairs. Access to more knowledge and resources and allies. but also obligations. Coalition members pledged to defend each other against aggression. If a member world was attacked, all members must respond with aid. Jake felt the weight of that responsibility settle on him. He said humans were not ready for that. They barely had ships that could leave their own solar system. How could they defend other worlds light years away? Lyra explained the invitation came with conditions. Earth would have provisional status for 20 years. Time to develop capabilities while benefiting from coalition membership. During that time, they would not be required to participate in military actions. But they must show progress and commitment to coalition principles. Jake asked what principles those were. Lyra said the defense of freedom, the protection of the weak, opposition to tyranny and conquest, the same principles that made him pull her sons from that river. The same principles that made his neighbors fight beside alien warriors against an enemy they did not understand. Those were the values the coalition was built on. Jake sat back thinking about implications. This was too big for him to decide. It needed to go to world leaders. They must make this decision together. But Lyra said the Ascendant Council valued his opinion specifically. If he believed humanity was not ready, they would wait. If he believed Earth should accept, they would proceed. His voice carried weight because of who he was and what he represented. Jake asked why his opinion mattered so much. Lyra smiled and said because he represented the best of what humanity could be. He was not the smartest or strongest or most powerful human, but he had something more important, a good heart and courage to act on it. That was what the galaxy needed. Not more weapons or technology, but more people willing to do the right thing regardless of personal cost. Jake thought about his quiet life before two boys crashed into his river. About the battle and changes that swept across Earth. About responsibilities he reluctantly accepted. About the future his planet faced with or without alien help. He thought for a long time. Finally, he said they should accept. Humanity was not perfect and would make mistakes. But they would try. They would work to be worthy of this opportunity. Lyra nodded with approval. She would carry his recommendation to her council, along with her own observations. She believed Earth would receive provisional membership, and she believed humanity would prove worthy of full membership when the time came. She had faith in them. Jake asked what happened if they failed. If they were not worthy, Lyra said they would still have tried and there was honor in that. But she did not believe they would fail. She had seen humans at their worst and best. She chose to believe the best would prevail. 2 years after the battle at the Crawford Ranch, Jake stood at the dedication ceremony for the Unity. Earth's first interstellar vessel was enormous and beautiful, a fusion of human ingenuity and ascendant engineering working together. The ship gleamed in the sunlight, ready to carry humanity beyond their solar system for the first time. Ready to prove they belonged among the stars. Representatives from every nation on Earth attended the ceremony. Delegations from 12 coalition worlds were present as honored guests. Kale and Ren were there with their mother. The boys were young men now studying at the Frontier Diplomatic Academy. They spoke fluent English and several other Earth languages. They had grown tall and confident but still remembered the rancher who pulled them from the river. Frank Murphy stood beside Jake in formal attire that looked uncomfortable on him. Several townspeople who fought in the battle were invited as honored guests. Frank said quietly he never thought he would see this day. Ships that could travel between stars built by humans with help from aliens. It seemed impossible, but here they were. Jake agreed, saying none of them expected this 2 years ago. Director Price gave a speech about humanity's journey from isolation to membership in the galactic community. She talked about courage and cooperation and the future waiting among the stars. Commander Darius spoke about the potential he witnessed in humans, their capacity for growth and adaptation. Leaders from various coalition worlds offered welcome and support. Everyone was optimistic about what came next, but it was Jake who was asked to activate the Unity systems for the first time. He protested, saying he was not the right person. He was just a rancher who pulled 2 kids from a river. But President Martinez disagreed. She said he was the person who started everything. He saved 2 boys from drowning and set in motion everything that followed. He represented what humanity could be at its best. There was no one more right for this honor. So Jake found himself standing before thousands of people. Billions more watched across Earth and throughout coalition space. He looked at the button before him, then at faces surrounding him, friends and neighbors, world leaders and aliens who became allies. everyone waiting for him to take this step forward. He pressed the button. The Unity systems came online with a hum of power that built to a crescendo. Lights flowed across its hull in patterns both beautiful and functional. Its engines, capable of incredible speeds, idled with barely contained energy. The crowd erupted in cheers. Jake stepped back, uncomfortable with attention, but Lyra caught his arm gently. She said he should stay. This was his moment, too. Jake replied quietly that he'd just pulled 2 kids from a river. Nothing more than that. Lyra agreed yes, he did, and by that simple act of kindness he changed the course of history. Never underestimate what one person could do. His actions proved that one choice made with courage and compassion could transform everything. After the ceremony, Jake found himself at a reception with dignitaries from across the galaxy. He felt out of place in his formal suit, surrounded by sophisticated diplomats and advanced beings. But then Kale and Ren approached, bringing several young humans studying at the academy. They introduced their friends with pride. Kale introduced Amy Liu, who was studying xenobiology. She wanted to understand all species in the galaxy. Marcus Johnson was learning coalition law, wanting to help establish justice throughout the stars. Sophie Okafor was training to be a pilot on the Unity. She wanted to fly among the stars and prove humans belonged out there. All of them looked at Jake with respect and curiosity. Amy said what he did, pulling Kale and Ren from the river, inspired her to study alien life. She wanted to find ways to help all species coexist peacefully. Marcus said the stories about the battle at his ranch showed him that laws and rights mattered everywhere, not just on Earth. Sophie said simply, she wanted to see all the worlds they were connected to now, to explore and learn and represent humanity well. Jake felt emotion tighten his throat. These young people represented humanity's future, and they were bright with possibility and hope. He told them they would do amazing things, all of them. But they should remember that fancy technology and advanced knowledge were important, but kindness and courage mattered more. They should not lose their humanity as they reached for the stars. Hold on to what made them human. Later that evening, Jake sat on his porch with Lyra, looking up at the stars. The night sky looked different now. He knew some of those distant lights were coalition worlds, allies and friends spread across the galaxy. It was strange to think about. 2 years ago, those were just points of light. Now they represented real places with real people living their lives. Jake asked what happened now for Earth. Lyra said they would grow and learn, face challenges and overcome them. In 18 years, Earth's provisional membership would be reviewed. If they proved themselves, they would become full coalition members with all rights and responsibilities. Jake asked what happened if they had not proven themselves. Lyra said they would extend the provisional period or part as friends. But she did not believe that would happen. Humans showed remarkable adaptability and determination. They would be ready. Jake asked if there would be more attacks. More threats like the Zathari, Lyra said possibly. The galaxy was vast and not all its inhabitants were peaceful. But Earth would not face threats alone. That was the point of the coalition, to stand together against those who would conquer and oppress. Unity made them strong. Division made them vulnerable. They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Lyra spoke again. She said the Ascendant would be honored to have him visit their homeworld when his responsibilities allowed. Kale and Ren wanted to show him their home as he showed them his. Jake smiled at the thought. He said he was not sure what a rancher from Montana would do on an alien world. Lyra replied simply that he would be himself. That was enough. That had always been enough. In the years that followed, Earth continued its transformation. The Unity made its first journey beyond the solar system, carrying diplomats and scientists to coalition worlds. More ships were built, each one an improvement on the last. Human colonists settled on Mars and the moons of Jupiter, taking first steps toward becoming a spacefaring species. Progress continued steadily, but Earth remained Earth. The ranch where it all began was preserved as a historical site, though Jake still lived there when duties allowed. The townspeople who fought in the battle became symbols of human courage. Their story was told and retold as an example of what ordinary people could do when they stood together. The Frontier Diplomatic Center became a city where human and alien worked side by side. Not everything was perfect. There were still conflicts in nations that resisted cooperation, and people who feared change. But the overall direction was positive. Humanity was learning to think beyond their small world, to see themselves as part of something larger. to understand their place in the galaxy and their responsibility to it. Through it all, Jake Crawford remained a symbol of what was possible when someone chose to act with kindness and courage. He never sought fame or power, but used the influence he had to guide humanity toward its better nature. He spoke plainly about doing the right thing, about helping those in need, about standing up against injustice. Simple messages that resonated across the world. 10 years after pulling 2 boys from a river, Jake stood at another ceremony. This time for the opening of the Kale and Wren Memorial Academy for Interspecies Understanding, a school dedicated to teaching young humans and aliens to work together, to understand each other, to build the future cooperatively. The boys themselves were there, now adults serving as junior officers in the Ascendant Fleet. Wren spoke during the ceremony, saying they would not be there without Jake. He saved their lives, but did more than that. He showed them the best of what humanity could be. Through them and their mother, he showed the galaxy. That simple act of pulling them from the river echoed across the stars. It changed everything for everyone. Jake gave his usual response that he just did what anyone should do. Kale smiled and said exactly. That was the point. He did what anyone should do. In doing so, he reminded everyone what should meant. That was his gift to the galaxy, not technology or weapons, but a reminder of simple goodness, of basic decency, of choosing to help rather than ignore. As Jake stood there surrounded by humans and aliens, by friends old and new, by young people preparing to build a future among the stars, he felt peace. His quiet life had been disrupted beyond measure. His simple existence complicated in ways he never imagined. But he made a difference. He pulled 2 boys from a river, and in doing so pulled humanity toward its better self. The stars above still held mysteries and dangers. But they also held promise and opportunity. Humanity would face it all with courage and compassion, with the knowledge that kindness mattered. That one person could make a difference. That doing the right thing was always worth the cost, no matter how high. It all began with a rancher who pulled 2 boys from a river. It continued with billions of humans reaching for the stars, carrying the lesson Jake Crawford embodied. Choosing kindness over fear, action over apathy, courage over comfort, even the smallest act could echo across the galaxy and change the course of history.